Okay, my name's Andrew Wisdom. I'm the moderator for this experiment, I guess. Is it an experiment? I don't know. We'll see how we go. It'll be great. What we're trying to achieve today is just to explore what it's like in a heatwave in 2025. But first thing I want to do is to acknowledge that we're meeting on the lands of the Kulin Nations and pay my respect to their elders past and present. Important we do that whenever we meet in Melbourne. So we've got a big panel here. The panelists are drawn from all sorts of different parts of the world, different kinds of experience, levels of expertise, and so on and so forth. Some of them are playing themselves, as you'll discover as we go through. Some of them are playing characters that are not themselves. So it's January 25. We have to start putting ourselves into that space right now. In 2025, we're in the middle of an El Niño. 5 years it's been running. And the Bureau of Meteorology's heatwave forecast tool points to a major heatwave heading straight towards us. And so we're preparing. What's it like in 2025? Well, for a start, it's hotter. So the Bureau of Meteorology has done looked at a range of forecasts. This is a forecast they've made for January 21, 2025. Yellow is warm, orange is very hot, red is forget about it, very hot. And you can see there's a little blob just over the top of Melbourne, just to the north of Melbourne. Day one. We're off. It's 2025. We're heading towards a maximum of 42.8 after a cool 18.3. Not too bad. Anything under 20, I think I can sleep pretty well. So it's clear and hot, not a breath of wind blowing. Dead still. So, Cathy Oak, Premier of Victoria. It's a challenging time. 6 days in a row over 40 is being forecast. It's going to be a real test of the resilience of our systems and of our community and so on and so forth. What do you see as the big challenges for us?
Well, as Premier of this great state of ours, we have experienced many days of heat this summer, but as the Bureau has just predicted, we're about to experience a lot more and they're going to be a lot hotter. We have enacted our emergency management systems. We've coordinated or brought together under the Emergency Management Victoria controlling body who looks after all of our emergency services. They will be in charge of the operations that may unfold over the next few days. It's really important that over the last 10 years we've been collaborating with local government, with the community sector, with individuals to create our own individual resilience plans. People should know what to do in a heat wave, communities should know, local government should know, and hopefully a lot of that research, that work, the engagement plans that we've got in place will unfold, and as a state we should get through this next 10 days or 6 days.
So you're relying on a community that is well informed, motivated to look after themselves.
That's right.
That's a key plank. Okay, so Dean. So Dean Griggs is a volunteer at the Carlton Neighbourhood Learning Centre. And he lives with his elderly mother in a public housing block. Okay, so the Red Cross is phoning at-risk residents 3 times a day to check they're all right. Okay, so that's a bit of support that's there. And there are extended openings at some government facilities. The Carlton Heat app tells people where it's hot. So we've got an app that tells us what the temperature's like. What's it like for you? How are people responding to the Premier's drive for personal responsibility and so on?
Oh, look, we do what we can. The app, I think, in terms of where the hotspots are, it's probably got my place mentioned right on it because it's bloody hot at my place. It's incredibly warm. We don't really listen to the government warnings all that much. We just sort of stick together as a community. As a family, we do what we can. We try to stay hydrated and drink a lot of water and go to the beach when we can. Stick together as a community and give each other, look after each other's kids. If someone needs to go to the beach during the day, we'll help each other out. It's difficult, but we're getting through it. And the main thing I'm worried about is my mum, because she's 80 and it's really hot, and we nearly lost her last summer. So, and my wife and I both work, so we're not home during the day, and I don't know what's going to happen if I come home one day and she hasn't had that phone call from the Red Cross.
Okay, so you're okay. You've got a nice community. What about you, Joel? Joel's a homeless mother. She has a 3-month-old baby. You've worked in the past, but you're not working at the moment. Tell us about how you cope with the day.
So I do have a 3-month-old baby. We are homeless, so we usually go to shopping centres during the day, or we go to the park, or we go to a playgroup. But in the heat situation, I really fear for the safety of my 3-month-old, because as we know, the elderly and infants are more prone to heat stress than anyone else. So I am really scared, and I do fear for my child.
So what are you going to do today? What's the deal?
What are we going to do today?
It's going to be 42.8 today, 3 o'clock.
I think we might go to the local shopping centre where it's nice and cool, and if we can, maybe to the swimming pool, and spend as much time as we can there, because we don't know where we're going to go when business hours are over.
Yeah, right. So, Premier, is it possible that the swimming pools could be kept open until, I don't know, midnight or something like that? Is that possible?
Oh, absolutely. As we've worked with councils across the state, and when we first started experiencing long heat waves, 10, 15 years ago, local councils responded incredibly well and incredibly quickly to the community's needs for free access to places like swimming pools, and creating spaces that are free to that are cool and welcoming, and so that all of the community can feel safe.
Okay, Martin Dutch, doctor in the emergency department at Royal Melbourne Hospital, years of experience. You've seen this before, right? Tell us about what do you expect? So
what we can normally sort of expect, so we often have heat waves. What we know is that it's not just the community that heats up, it's the healthcare service that heats up during a heat wave. There's a structured plan for responding to heat waves in Victoria. So we know that basically we can expect to see substantially more workload across the healthcare system when the average temperature increases to about 30 degrees. And our first day of the heat wave is the first day that we start seeing more work. It's not just emergency departments, it's ambulances, it's general practitioners, it's the coroner's office, it's birth, deaths and marriages recording deceased people. Certainly it's been documented we'll expect to see more people pass away during a heat wave than what we'd do in another year at the same time of the year. And mainly that increased mortality or increased number of deaths almost solely occurs in people over 75. So while lots of people are concerned about young people, the sort of stats and the evidence would suggest to us that it's the elderly people who are in really significant trouble. Certainly after 65 years of age, but certainly after 75 is when the mortality really increases in that group. And the interesting thing, looking forward or looking back, the 2025 number, we'd be expecting to see double the number of people over 85 years of age than what we have in the current year. And we'd be expecting to see substantial increases, sort of 80% increase in people aged 65. So as a proportion of the population, our at-risk group is increasing. And
is part of the risk to do with the fact that they're isolated? Is that?
Yeah, so there's lots of sort of social trends that determine overall population health, but certainly I think there's a trend towards increasing social isolation. We know that during previous heat waves, up to 30% of people over 75 years of age have no other contact with another person during that heat wave, not a telephone call, not a friend or a relative who drops in. They sit there in their hot house, isolated alone for the duration of the heat wave.
Okay, thanks Martin. So Mary Faro, you are a resident of Emerald. You've been given a stay-ago advice 4 times in the last 6 weeks. Okay, so this isn't an isolated event. 4 times in the last 6 weeks, residents in the peri-urban area have had to decide whether to stay or go.
Right. Oh, okay.
So tell us what you do when that happens.
Well, we've been listening to the fire messages. It's been 10 years and it's finally getting into our head. I want to know, hands up, who's going to be putting us up? Because we're coming to your town. We're bringing the horse trailer, we're bringing the caravan because we're leaving early. So we will be swinging by to pick you up. You'll have to give us your address because we're going to camp out on the river and we're not expecting to be asked to move along because we're doing the right thing. We're leaving early. Our power's gone off in the hills because that's what happens when we have heat. And who can blame SB Osnet for turning the power off? It causes fires, and it then causes lawsuits. I'm from California. I know how that works. So we have to be careful with that. But we understand we have to leave. Our phones don't work. Our messaging is not working. The towers aren't working because the battery has run out, the backup battery. So we have to come to town.
Okay, Ariel's a researcher at Monash University on how do we describe it? Actually, I'll give you your full title. Senior Research Fellow and Director of Carbon and Energy Programs at the Monash Faculty of Information Technology. You know about power systems, right? It's 2025 now, how is it different now from how it was 10 years ago? Do people have their own sources of power? Is battery technology there to allow people to keep on operating even when the power goes off and so on and so forth?
Yeah, so the short answer is yes. Luckily, for the last 11 years, people like Terry and his company and the Premier and all her colleagues at the other states and the federal government have been working together with the assistance of some independent advice from the universities to try and understand how better to set up the rules of the energy game to make sure that the best technologies, the most economically efficient technologies come to the fore. That means batteries, where they're economic, will be adopted by people partly because they think it's a good idea, but partly because it's affordable, in combination with solar and other generation technologies, maybe even little wind turbines on top of every house or in every yard.
Radio. That's the end of day one. Pretty good, okay? We're coping all right. No problem so far. Okay, day two. Maximum 41.7, minimum after an overnight 28.6. What a shocking night. Okay. So the Fire Commissioners warned us about extreme risk of grass fires and bushfires coming up. So, Claire Johnston's a New Docklands resident. Her husband looks after their baby daughter in their apartment on level 20 of their nice shiny New Docklands tower. So analysis from Monash University shows that not all parts of the city are equally at risk. Some parts of the city get hotter than other parts. What are the advantages? What are the natural advantages for Docklands in this sort of situation?
Well, of course, the reason I bought there in the first place is because I have a north-facing waterfront apartment. And whilst I'll be working for the rest of my life to pay it off, I do have a lovely view and I do capture the ocean breeze. And so for me, that's a lovely part of the reason why I live where I live. And I also find that it makes me use less of my cooling and power because I do have the ability to have my windows open and secure that nice breeze coming through.
Okay, so that's one of the good things about Docklands. So Martin was saying before about the effect of isolation, and that certainly was the result of research, certainly in Chicago, isolated people. Tell us about isolation in Docklands.
Well, it's funny because you can be on your own or you can be in a community of, 15,000 people. So where I live at Victoria Harbour, I live in a 530-unit building and so I'm on the 20th floor, and I have at least 12 apartments on my floor, and so I can not see anybody for days or I can see anybody I want to. And I'm lucky that we do at Docklands have the community forum, so we have quite a tight-knit group of people. Of course, there is a substantial population down there, and people like the anonymity, but people also like to be part of a community. So it is a choice that you make, but there are all sorts of problems when situations emerge and you don't know who's actually living in your building. Okay,
so Ian Shears, Manager Urban Landscape, City of Melbourne. You're responsible for the urban forest. Can you just tell us about, first of all, the urban forest and tell us about its impact on the urban heat island effect?
Well, the urban forest is something that has been recognised as being incredibly important for the city, and earlier the Millennium Drought and other heat waves sort of enabled council to recognise that responding to these challenges, working with nature rather than against it, was a really smart thing to do. We've worked out that trees are incredibly effective air conditioners, for example, and that having really good tree canopy cover in combination with open space and permeability is a significant way to reduce urban temperatures. So The City Council, in conjunction with a forward-thinking state government, has worked with surrounding councils to establish a series of cool parkways throughout the city. And probably the jewel in the crown of that is the Elizabeth Street linear parkland. And there we've actually removed all of the asphalt. We've daylighted the creek, and so we've got a wonderful linear space that is cooler by up to 10 degrees than surrounding areas. So when we have how we welcome our country cousins down to the city to spend time, we've got a space that's cool, that's nice, that's inviting, and it's a communal space, so people don't need to feel isolated in their apartment buildings. They can come out, and the recognition of the open space strategy, we've got a cool space within 300 metres walking distance of everybody throughout the city. So it's a fundamentally important green infrastructure approach that it recognises the environmental service benefits of what nature can do, and uses that to respond to the heat island.
So how many degrees difference does it make? Have you got any idea of what what the temperature would be out on the asphalt versus underneath in this Elizabeth Street Creek?
Look, I mean,
way?
we put a lot of energy into understanding the science and getting the data right, and our thermal imagery indicates that beneath the shade of a healthy tree that's transpiring well, it's half that of out in the asphalt. And further to that, the city's recognised that dark black asphalt absorbs a lot of heat during the day, so we've put a lot of research and development into much cooler colours so that we're not sheeting blackness everywhere. We're actually putting a lot better albedo effect and reducing it. So it's not only the grey infrastructure, the green infrastructure is all working towards reducing urban temperatures and responding to the health and well-being of the community.
I love, one of my favourite places now is that Elizabeth Street Creek. Remember when the trams used to run down there? No. Lovely creek, trees growing over. So we've been in drought for 5 years, right? So has that had an impact on how the urban forest has been developing?
Look, and certainly the water is fundamental to growing the forest that we want, and for the transpiration. And we recognise that the cooling is an effect of the evaporation, the transpiration that is part of that natural forest process. But like natural forests, we've recognised that we need rainfall, and we need to actually grab hold of that rainfall when it falls. So we're moving away from that past practice of rainfall falling onto an asphalt or paved surface going to a pipe and being pumped out into the bay. We know that more rain falls on Greater Melbourne than is used by Melburnians throughout the year. So we've moved away significantly from that reliance on potable water from our dam storage, and we're now using stormwater harvesting systems to capture the water, clean it, and have it available throughout our urban spaces.
So 2 young children die in a car in a car park. They are locked in there while the parent was inside shopping. It's such a stupid thing to do, right? But people are starting to panic now. Like, things are really bad. What message can you send to people right now? How can you calm people down and tell them to reinforce that idea of self-responsibility and so on and so forth?
Yeah, obviously it's incredibly sad that these 2 children have died, and unfortunately every year that we have a heat wave there are these deaths, and unfortunately they do seem to still occur. But I believe that we've done a lot better in our engagement processes with the community, and acknowledging that there is an individual role, a community role, and a government role to play in managing our response to heat wave. I know that the state is sweltering right now, and that we are at buckling point. We've been in this heat wave for a few days now, but the Emergency Management Victoria is coordinating our response incredibly well. The Office of Living Victoria is managing how we're managing our water resources, and our transport facilities. Whilst they are at stress, we have invested a lot of money in the infrastructure, and we've invested a lot of money in making the networks work a lot better. But so I'd like to stress that the state is with the community, but to follow the community, our individual and our community heat response action plans would be a great way of making sure that we're all working together and coping in this heat wave.
Okay.
Well, my comment is I have a 3-year-old, and she's in childcare all day, every day, because I'm working so hard to pay for my apartment. And what I'm interested to know is, we talk about old people and people who are of disability or who have housing issues. What about children, and how are we going to help our children in our childcare centres for all those people who are working and travelling is what I'm interested in.
It's I'd like to, at this moment, thank all of our schools and our childcare providers for their assistance in managing our city in the heat wave. We have contributed through our community facility funding program money to many childcare facilities across the state to cope with the change of climate, and we've invested a lot of money in schools to design them so that they're cooler with ventilation, and the buildings are not as hot as they used to be, and a lot of those buildings are coming into play, and hopefully your child's childcare centre has been a recipient of one of these grants.
Well, I think actually the issue is that when everything gets too hot and the generators shut down, we're asked to keep the children at home, and so the issue doesn't really get resolved. And so, I'm interested in making sure that our plans address those issues, and so that we keep those institutions open for children who may not otherwise have air conditioning units.
It's day 2. Everything's kind of under control still. It's okay, Martin Goodson.
I'm glad that everything's under control for you guys, but I'm working in a busy emergency department, and I can tell you things are almost never fully under control. So just to give you a feel for it, day 2 of the heat wave, we're expecting, while yesterday was busy and we were seeing perhaps 12 to 20% more patients than what we normally see in hospitals that are designed to sort of normally run at 100% capacity. Today's even busier than yesterday, because every day that you're exposed to heat from a health point of view, it's not just about how hot it is, it's about how long you're exposed to it. And this is yet another shocking day on the back of the day before. Fortunately, I'm very happy that about 15 years ago the government decided that it would start purchasing hotels next to every public hospital, with the idea that they run sort of for profit to offset the hospital commercially. But at the same time, they could be used for discharging members of the public who didn't need health care but needed sort of air conditioning and social infrastructure. Because the problem was, in the early 2000s, every time they had a heat wave, the hospital would fill up with elderly people that you could make them well pretty quickly, but there was no safe place to send them to, because their house didn't have an air conditioner, and so they would sit round in an acute hospital bed. Back then it was about $500 a day costing the taxpayers. Now, it's probably $1,500 a day costing the taxpayers. Now we've got a more appropriate temporary piece of accommodation until this heat wave breaks, to shift people out of public hospitals as a discharge destination. So that's working well for us.
Sounds like a really great investment. That's good. Now it's day 3. Day 3, maximum 43. Day 3, 43 degrees after an overnight low of 27. Another stinking hot night, followed by a stinking hot day. And what happens, Terry Jones, SP AusNet, after a few days? Tell us what happens after a few days of super hot temperatures.
Yeah, so our job in the network is to keep supplies on for lights and, more importantly, air conditioners. So by day 3, we've got our integrated plans for bushfire and heatwave responses well in place and well working. We have members sitting in the Emergency Council Response Organisation, and we review at least twice a day what we've done in the day and what we're going to do the next day. So day 3, things are warming up. Our big problem is heat in the cables, in the assets, the transformers. And when they start to get warm, we start to have problems. So the key response to that we have is demand management. So we've already issued 3 critical peak price days, which encourages commercial and industrial customers to reduce demand, which allows the cables to run cooler. We've probably got about 50 to 100 megawatts of demand reductions from the CPD calls. And we also have on standby another 50 to 100 megawatts of demand management on one-on-one calls, so we can actually target where we achieve the demand reduction. And that could be a building, that could be a chocolate factory, wherever in the network that we find things are getting hot on our assets, we can actually target further peak demand. So day 3, we're still cruising, everything's a bit warm, but no problems.
Yeah, unfortunately it's not true. And I'll just, as I tell you that, I'll do this.
Sorry.
There you go. Okay. That's not true, because actually you start shedding load on day 3. You thought it was okay. When you got up this morning, it was a bright sunny day, right? you got air conditioning so you didn't care, you woke up, you were eating your cornflakes out on the balcony, birds were chirping, then you got the call saying, we are routed.
Yes.
We're going to have to start shedding load right now. What does shedding load actually mean?
Yes, well, that could probably be caused by a failure of an asset, for example, or a cable with an unforeseen fault on it that goes out of service.
Brilliant, that's what happened.
So in those circumstances, first option is switching around the problem. So we have our automated distribution feeder response where automatically within a certain number of minutes, the feeder will find another route for the electricity around the network. And typically in a city like this, it's a highly interconnected network with many routes into one location. So that's the first response. Next response is we've already stopped planned maintenance. We don't do any work on the system. So we have crews ready to do repairs. Nobody's working on the system at all. We've got crews ready, emergency response. They go in, isolate the problem and start to fix it. Third level of response, if we're into emergency type supplies, hospitals, police stations, public services, they already have their own generation in many cases. So they can start up their own generation and run probably for 3 or 4 hours. We ourselves have our own generation on 20-foot trailers that we can mobilise and put into a problem area. So third day, everything's cool. If we have a bad event or an asset failure, we can still respond and keep the lights on. Whether we can keep the air conditioning on is a matter of how much demand is created by that air conditioning.
Okay, so wouldn't you know it, everything goes wrong. You are shedding load now. Right. How does shedding load actually work? Stop, obfuscating. Tell us about shedding load. How does it work?
Shedding load would go along a pre-programmed rolling cycle across different feeders within the city. It would deal with non-essential loads first, and we have all those scheduled. We would not touch essential loads. So probably a building would go out for a day, another building would go out for the next day. So it would be part of our emergency response planning that we have this scheduled running load reduction.
Okay, useful. Okay, so luckily, Martin, you work at Royal Melbourne, one of those essential services that is not affected by a rolling thing. Do you want to just tell us about how secure you feel with your power?
I want to make it real what load shedding means. If you get residential load shedding, what that means is that you can't run your air conditioner. And we know that we know an air conditioner reduces the likelihood that you'll die from heat-related illness by 70%. And so when they've done population studies where they've talked about load shedding and the health impact, we expect to see a 50% increase in the number of people who die in a community if load shedding occurs for residential properties. So load shedding means people will die, and that's a balance that you make about a small group of people in an isolated geographic area being exposed to that increased risk versus the whole state falling over. So that's the reality. The second reality is that my hospital is not an island. My hospital relies on all of the same infrastructure that the rest of the community does. Now, sure, we have some very special, wires that run into our place that are a little bit isolated from others. But certainly, it's my experience that I'm aware of multiple hospitals in metropolitan Melbourne that have had to evacuate because not only has their normal electrical infrastructure off the grid failed, but concurrently their internal hospital backup generation has failed. And that's happened, in the 2000s in at least 2 hospitals that I'm aware of. And I'm also aware that even brand new hospitals that are recently built, sometimes their internal power infrastructure surprisingly is not tested until these big days, and it can fall over as well.
So tell us, Tony Murphy, Fire, what's your title? Hang on, what are you? You're Deputy Fire Commissioner. Tell us about the risk to drinking water supplies from fires in catchment areas for reservoirs.
Well, there's definitely a consideration to ensuring the the risk and consequence that goes with any fire, in the catchment or beyond the catchment, where you've got rivers, like such as the big rivers around the Hume area, which feeds, our supply chain to reservoirs. But because we've been very effective and very efficient with our planned burns programs, they've been very much based around risk and also community protection. We've reduced the risk significantly. We've also got technology that will immediately identify through satellite and also through other infrared technology where we've got fire in the landscape and make sure that we're immediately on there with a very, very rapid attack. Okay, so Dean, now things are getting pretty crappy. You talked about your AC. You don't even have an AC, right? So you have to go and stay with some of your neighbours to do that. So people are out on the streets the whole time. It's 27 minimum overnight, right? It's a hot day in the middle of the night. So people are getting pretty grumpy and crabby now. So street violence is starting to break out. Problems with drug use on the streets. It's not really a safe place to be. Tell us how you cope with that.
Well, what we do, depending on early in the evening, if it's, we've got no air conditioner and the place is unbearably hot, if the power's still on at Northland, we'll go to the movies, so we'll spend time there out of the house and go and see the Lego Movie 3 that's coming out at that time.
Jeez, it's pretty slow.
Yeah.
11 years.
And then we would gather together a few families, and with no power, we'd just head to the beach and just spend the night at the beach and actually make a night of it. Like, we'd actually, rely on our own resources, try and find some food and make a bit of a night of it, take mum with us and actually just make
safety in numbers kind of thing.
Yeah, and just go to the beach and actually try and have a sort of turn the adversity into something where we can actually build the community.
What about you, Joel?
I just hear chaos. And being homeless, and being in the homeless community, I know that there's 22,000 people homeless in Victoria on any given night, and 1,000 of those, over 1,000, sleep rough, so they're sleeping on the streets. Being homeless also includes people sleeping outside or in impoverished dwellings, sleeping temporarily with friends or relatives, staying in boarding houses, staying in government-funded crisis or temporary accommodation, and living in severely crowded dwellings. Now, people living in those sort of conditions, we're the local community. We're a big part of the local community, 22,000 people in Victoria, just Victoria. So it's chaos. We are losing it.
Are you scared?
We're scared. We don't know what to do. There's a lot of kids as well that are homeless with their mums and with their families. What do we do? What do we do?
Okay, Martin, you want to say something?
I would just like to say that society gets a bum rap during disasters and crises in terms of how we cope. In fact, like, you read the newspapers and stuff, and everyone says, there's panic on the street and everyone's murdering everyone and rolling everyone for everyone's pension check. Just doesn't happen. It's media legend that's promulgated because it gets front page news. Most of the time, most communities in any time in history actually act resiliently in the vast majority of times. So my recommendation to my patients that flow through my front door is stop reading the newspaper and don't listen to sensationalist stuff. The other thing just about the homeless people, they're a good example of the people that in the early 2000s we really struggled to find appropriate place to house them during their intercurrent stressor, which in this case is a heat wave. Certainly back then, accommodation options, crisis accommodation, overflowing, ridiculously over capacity, and these people would either take up literally in camp in our waiting room, or alternatively be taking up a acute care hospital bed, which is a precious commodity back then and still I expect now.
Yeah. Okay, that's the end of this day. So things are starting to get a little bit, tougher, right? On to day 4 now. Okay, another really hot, stinking night, 25.6 degrees overnight, 43.5 degrees maximum on day 4, really tough. So, Premier, I open up with you again, I'm sorry. You get paid the big bucks. So, public transport, we haven't talked about that much yet. It's getting more erratic now. Trains are running on a reduced schedule, of course they are, because, for a bunch of them their AC doesn't work anymore. power lines starting to sag a little bit and so on and so forth. There's no rail buckling, of course, because we dealt with that 10 years ago after we had those pictures of people watering the railway tracks in the middle of a heat wave. Pretty scary thought. Anyway, so that's pretty bad. So things are, we're running about 75%. But then disaster strikes. A transmission station in South Morang explodes at 2 p.m. and power to the city loop is lost. Trains and passengers on the trains are marooned in the middle of the city loop. There is no evening rail service. There's no rail service for the rest of the day. Buses are put in. As well as the rail problems, that extensive amount of heat, and some roads are affected by continuous heat, and the top surface of the road just gets rolled up on the wheels. So that's happening all the way across Melbourne. You're having to close roads now, so now there are traffic jams everywhere. Over to you.
I'd firstly like to thank the emergency services for getting the people out of the loop, and thankfully no one was hurt. And I acknowledge the difficulties, and I'd like to also thank the passengers for assisting their neighbours getting up through that system. And of course, we have implemented many things to make our transport network a lot better, but it is under stress right now, and we will get through today. And this evening we asked where there is space available in our hotels, where there is space in the community facilities, where individuals can help their friends or relatives as they are stuck in the city this evening. We ask that they do what they can. Tomorrow, I would ask that all employers enact their heatwave response plan, which means that a lot of their employees will need to work from home if possible, or from one of these community hubs with a lot of cooling if they can't work at home due to the heat. But we will need to make sure that the roads are clear, not only for replacement buses for priority transport, but also for the roads for our emergency services and our emergency vehicles. So we will be implementing a ban on cars, except for emergency services and obviously for priority needs.
So you're establishing some clear arterial roads that are available for critical movement. Okay, that's really good. So turning to you, Gary Stickland, how can you help?
Well, I was feeling pretty comfortable on days 1, 2 and 3, but I'm starting to get a bit worried now. And so all my great plans have sort of gone out the window to a degree, but a couple of things have happened just to set the scene for the tourism and hospitality industry. We've got a little bit smarter. A number of facilities, or particularly hotels, have rooftop gardens which are somewhat self-sufficient, so we're able to grow some of our own food, particularly vegetables. That time of year is one of our busiest times. It's where our international visitors are probably in their greatest numbers coming into the city, particularly talking about the Australian Open tennis period in January. The Grand Prix's moved on, but our major events department has been particularly good, and they've actually got the Tour de France to come to Melbourne instead. So, we could have some significant events happening in the city at the same time. So the capacity of hotels might be quite restricted. So we want to be good community citizens. We're going to have a 6-day Earth Hour event, but SB AusNet has made sure that, or not sure, but not without them trying to do it, we don't really have supply to really worry about that much. So we've got a few challenges going on. What we would do, though, there is, within the CBD of Melbourne, there's certainly a restriction on supply of accommodation, but in the inner suburban areas, a number of motels that generally aren't as highly occupied. So we'd be calling on those members to do what they can to assist. But on any given day, 20% of hotel rooms in Melbourne are probably vacant, so there's capacity there to take up some of those areas. Maybe it's assisting with housing from a hospital point of view, so there is that not outsourcing, but outpatient type care. We have events and function rooms that are potentially being cooled, so a space like this that is probably being cooled through a central cooling system already in place, assuming we've got enough power to do that. It can house people, accommodate people temporarily, possibly some of our homeless community and other people have come in from regional areas as well.
So
there's a few things we could do.
So Joel and Mary, would you take up that offer? Would you go and spend a couple of hours chilling out at the Alto on Burke?
We might do a little bit of timeshare there and kind of swap it around to get through the whole community.
What about you, Joel? Would you take up his opportunity, his offer?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's a really good idea. And I think we need more things like that. So even if homeless services had connections to real estate agents where homeless people could go to a first point of contact and, you know, they have a relationship with real estate agents and get us in the suburbs and in hotel rooms and motels, because we might not necessarily know how to or what's available. So I think that's a really good idea.
Yeah, okay. So it's the issue of how you actually tell people this is happening, right?
Well, getting communication out is one thing, and I think business is very good at taking from the community in the way of taking their money. And it's a time of crises that we probably need to see what we can do to put back. There's no immediate return. It's part of being part of a community and doing what you can to assist. It's not going to be the whole solution.
Be a bit of it. Okay, so that's great. Unfortunately, 9 o'clock your power goes off. So it goes off from 9 till 2. You can promise them it will come back on at 2. What do you do now?
In our case,
apart from panic.
Apart from that, yeah. No, apart from, I survived it was the 1994 gas crisis, survived through that, not the same sort of extent, but that was quite challenging. There's certainly one way to upset hotel guests, and that's to give them cold showers, but at this stage we're struggling to give them a shower at all. So I guess from that point of view, we'd be ensuring that our guests are informed about what's going on, that they're able to move around the hotel. Obviously, lifts being out of action, so similar issues to what you have in high-rise residential accommodation as well. So trying to manage those sort of things would certainly be a significant challenge. We're a fairly low-rise building, so a lot of that is taken away, but in high-rise hotels, which many are, that's a significant issue, just moving people around.
Okay, that's the end of day 4. So things are still going okay. Day 5, maximum 26 overnight, still stinking bloody hot. 44 degrees, maximum day 5. Pretty bad. Okay, Gary, it's taken you all night to get home. You get there, the power's off.
Yep.
One of your neighbours on the 15th floor, elderly lady like your mother, good friend of your mother actually, she hasn't got anybody, so she's by herself. There's no power on the thing. She can't walk, she's got arthritis. So what do you do?
Well, I'd pop up and visit her, and from there, given she looked in a lot of need, I think get some of the supplies from our place, some of the tin goods that we could probably give her to have a meal, and then probably call an ambulance and see if we could get some hydration into her. But
is an ambulance going to come? You can say yes, that's okay.
So look, there is some redundancy in the system. There are emergency ambulances and there are non-emergency ambulances, and there are a number of private companies, and that's probably even more common in 2025. So it's likely that the state will have shelled out some of these transport responsibilities even further to the private sector. So someone will come at some time, but how many hours you have to wait in a really hot room?
Who knows?
Who knows?
Yeah, okay.
I was just going to say the good thing about our apartment block, and I'm not sure what it's like in Docklands, but because we've all lived there for a long time, we all know each other, so we can quickly sort of get up there and visit Mavis, spend an hour on, hour off, 24 hours. So, for those families that have stayed in the building, we can actually hang around and give her a hand and keep her hydrated and have a chat to her.
Okay. Joel, your baby's getting a bit unwell now. Heat affected. What do you do? Take her to the emergency room?
I think I would have to.
Got no choice,
Day or
have
night?
you really? Oh, it's day.
It's day?
Mm-hmm.
I would definitely have to take her to the emergency room. But like you said, I'm not sure how long we're going to have to wait, but it's our only option.
And you're going to have to walk, right? There's no way of getting
Yeah,
there.
we're going to have to walk. If there's a bus, we might have to catch a bus.
Trams might be running.
Trams, public transport.
Yep.
Definitely.
Okay, so that's you. So you want to say something, Terry?
Just to let you know, at the end of day 4, we fixed the cable fault, so supplies are back on.
Good.
If it's a transformer failure,
Yep.
that'll be in the morning, day 5.
Right.
We've either taken extra load off or we put our mobile gensets on. So day 4, if it's a cable fault, we're back on. Day 5 in the morning, if it's a transformer fault, we're back on.
Anyway, so you haven't slept for 5 days. It's relentless, right?
Sure.
The poor old lambos, same thing. They haven't slept for 5 days, so they've got to be out in the sun. So how's it going with you? How's it travelling?
Well,
can you get help? Is there anyone who can help? Can you get some...
The short answer is no.
Right.
So the hospitals probably by this stage, we'd expect that we'd well and truly exceeded our maximum capacity as far as beds are concerned, which will mean that people will be sleeping in the emergency department waiting for a bed for more than 24 hours. Mm-hmm. The hospital will have stopped all of its elective operations. There are some beds that it can staff, but staffing beds is often contingent on nursing staff coming to work. And if the nursing staff can't drive on the roads or catch the public transport or are busy defending their house from a bushfire, then it makes things a bit difficult. We just have to battle on with the fixed resources that we have.
Okay. So that's the end of day 5, I think. Should we move on to day 6 now? People are getting pretty tired now. Day 6. This is the last day forecast for the thing. 21.5, quite a cool night overnight, but then back up again to 41.8 for the last day of the thing. So, Mary, you've got social media going, all sorts of really nice community getting going. There's a risk, of course, that you're never going to move out. The Premier has to confront that possibility.
Well, we've now become part of Melbourne.
There you are. You're now a resident. That's right.
We are Melbourne. And if we lose our houses in a bushfire, we become part of the homeless.
Yeah. So what about people who aren't social network people? What about people that are elderly members? I mean, a lot of people living up in the peri-urban area are going to be,
Absolutely. But, in our experience with the social media, that they always know somebody who's got the social media.
Right.
And that's the way it works, that we get that information out so that if we use our phone, that somebody else who doesn't understand the phone or understand how to work it or doesn't have an iPhone, because that's, of course, by then it'll be the, I don't know what kind of phone. We'll be just thinking it. It'll just be happening. But, you always know somebody who's got it. And that's the way it works in the hills.
So it's about having a tight-knit community.
That's right. It's all about communication in the end. And person-to-person communication, ultimately.
Yeah. So you guys are pretty settled, right?
We're part of Melbourne now.
Sweet. You just got to get used to it. Okay, Martin. Last disaster for you. But it is a big disaster, this one. A large retirement home has lost power at midday. I know you fixed it, but I don't know. Bam, it went again. And the residents are in mortal danger. So the hospital takes the unprecedented step, and perhaps illegal, I don't know, of sending you and a team out there to provide on-the-spot assistance to them. You haven't slept for a week. The emergency's bulging at the seams. What do you do? How do you respond to that?
So you might be surprised to know, but we've been doing that since the early 2000s because nursing homes haven't been coping for some time now. So we've got actually a crack team of doctors and nurses that routinely visit nursing homes to assist them with managing their sicker patients in situ. So I'm expecting by 2025 that everyone has had a sensible discussion about how their medical care would like to be administered in the last years of their life. And back in the early 2000s, we knew that sort of 80% of one's total lifetime healthcare expenditure was spent in the last year of their life. But it's now 2025 and people are going, this is a bit unusual and a bit inappropriate, and there's a more measured approach to managing patients in the community with less people being transported by nursing homes. But your scenario does flip our understanding of who's at risk, because studies have previously shown that when you live in supported care, you're actually protected during a heat wave. A nursing home is or a retirement village is a great place to be because you're a community, you've got people overseeing you, and you've got good air conditioning and health infrastructure. It's the people living alone who are elderly who are at the greatest risk. But now we've got a whole cluster of people who are overheating, and they probably need to be evacuated. And how do you evacuate a nursing home? You get a bus company to go and pick them up, and you round them all up onto a bus and you take them to a community area that's got air conditioning in it. And then you get community services like St John or the Red Cross to provide basic, simple medical care in the makeshift environment.
So, Premier, back to you to close. Okay, it's coming to the end of day 6 now. Cool change sweeping across the city. We all throw our doors open, you know. Breathe that cool air. Thank God for that. Tomorrow is Australia Day holiday. Today's a Sunday. Tomorrow is a holiday on Monday. And bizarrely, we're going to have fireworks. Maybe we are. It's cool change, right? It's not hot anymore. No problem. And you, luckily, have the bully pulpit. You're giving a keynote speech to open the fireworks on the Yarra in front of our 10,000 new residents and everybody else who shows up. What do you say? What do you reflect about the last 6 days? What do you think about how we could do better or whatever? There you go.
Well, given it is Australia Day tomorrow, it is appropriate that we acknowledge the tireless efforts of everyone across the community, our emergency service providers, our hospitals, our local government, our community, for working together through this incredibly trying time. Australia Day is a great opportunity to reflect on that. And with respect to the fireworks, given that we have, despite the best efforts, we have lost too many Victorians once again during this heat wave. As a mark of respect, we won't be having fireworks this Australia Day, but we will be using the time to gather our energy to work towards rebuilding our businesses and getting our lives back on track in the next few days. But I would like to acknowledge once again the efforts of the community and of our services, and we will be reviewing our heatwave responses and our heatwave action plans and our resilience plans in the coming days, and looking forward to investing a lot more in climate adaptation as we move forward. I believe I'm now playing the role of councillor. You know, the City of Melbourne is obviously proud to host the event that we just did tonight. One of the key parts of our climate adaptation strategy is about community engagement and awareness and raising these issues that have been raised tonight. And so thank you to all of the panel for being involved and providing your insights of what the future may or may not look like in not that long a time, in 11 years. The City of Melbourne is involved or has instigated some many award-winning strategies and plans that are going to help the city deal with climate change and the effects of extreme weather. And Dean Griggs and Ian Shears have already gone through a few of the responses that we'll be looking at in community and also in the ecology of the city through the forest and our water-sensitive urban design and programs like that. There's lots of information on our website, so go to the City of Melbourne if you're interested in what we are doing and how we plan to actually manage the change of climate in the future. Tonight has been a collaboration. I'd like to thank obviously Mara from Green Cross for working with the city on this, and Andrew for hosting tonight's hypothetical. Again, I thank the panel. I'd like to thank Beth and Matilda from the City of Melbourne and the sustainability team for coordinating all of us, getting us ready, and so thank you for doing that. And as has already been presented, we're very proud that we have been selected as one of the inaugural resilience cities through the Rockefeller Foundation, and I know that there's workshops over the next couple of days, and we will learn more, because we know that as a city we definitely can't do this alone. As a state you can't do it alone, and as a community we can't do it alone, so we need to collaborate and work together, not just in the hypothetical but in the reality as well. So thank you again for your attendance, and hopefully you've enjoyed it.